Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Teens for Business, and I'm your host, Jackie.
I'm Kylan.
I'm Ivan.
And I'm Jack.
I'm so glad you could join us today. So today we're going to be talking about the University of Pennsylvania's Management and Technology Summer Institute, which is also known as M&TSI, and I attended this program this summer. And so just as a quick overview, M&TSI is an intensive, rigorous 3-week program that occurs every year in August. And so for Teens for Business, we'll break this into 2 parts, and there will be like a 2-part M&TSI series. And then in the first part, we'll talk about like academics and kind of that aspect of things. And then Ivan, Kaiwan, and Jack can ask me any questions about it. And then part 2 will be more about like the fun, social lives, activities, things like that, like the student life. So without further ado, let's get into the first part. So just to really quickly preface, M&TSI was perhaps one of the best experiences in my life. And the program is built kind of as an introduction to M&T, which is the Jerome Fisher Management Technology Program, which is a collaboration between Wharton and the engineering school at Penn. So it kind of really just looks at the intersection of business and tech. And on a more like academic side, I learned an extraordinary amount about the topics I already loved, but it also kind of introduced and kindled new passions for me. So our days were split with morning business lectures with Professor Jeffrey Babin in the morning, which starts at 10 a.m. And I know that's like a bit earlier than some of the other classes that go on with like summer programs at Penn. So I was really grateful for that relatively later start because I could sleep in more. And then our afternoons were like engineering lectures from Professor Sid Deliwala, and those usually ended at around 6. They were like for the last week, it ended at a little bit later. Sometimes it went until like 2 a.m., but that was just because like we had projects to work on in the lab. But besides that, in the middle, we also get like a 1 hour break, which starts at 1 p.m. and then goes to 2 o'clock. And by the way, if anyone's going to Penn, and I don't know if Ivan and Jack can relate to this when they went to LBW, but my friend group absolutely just demolished Houston Hall's sushi after like our morning classes. I think like that was the rhythm we kind of settled into. And then also while the classes are like technically broken up into like business and like engineering segments with Professor Babin and Daliwala, they were like all very integrated with both business and tech. So for instance, when we talk about like scaling ventures, they'd be like about tech ventures in the business class. And then IPOs weren't just like for any random company on the S&P, but it was more for like the tech companies. And even when we went to Morgan Stanley in New York, we talked with Michael Grimes, who was the head of like the tech division at Morgan Stanley. So, like it kind of really had a lot of integration. And then, as I previously mentioned, with the engineering note, we had a final project, which was where we made kind of like this IoT, Internet of Things. And we just like got the ability to like have an actual product, but also have like business parts to it. So that was something that was really, really fun. And then for the first 2 weeks, Professor Daliwala actually like introduced a bunch of like engineering things to us, gave us engineering lectures, introduced different engineering majors, and we had like a bunch of talks from like engineering professors or like from different sides of engineering. So like we had bioengineering, we had like other things like that, like professors to come in to talk to us. And about like the final presentations, we also had like projects, and then we got to present to like some Penn faculty, and then my team actually ended up winning best innovation out of us. And obviously this sounds like, I know it sounds like a lot, and it was, but like we had so much fun, like all 75 of us had so much fun. And then do you guys have any questions about the program? Like I know that was a bunch of information and like there's a lot of information online, but do you guys have any specific questions?
Yeah, I think I'll start off with the first question is that I noticed like it's like a merge between engineering and business, especially like Wharton's like especially famous for business. So would you say would be like the diversity of strengths within students? Were there like more students that were like had a really strong business background, but not a lot of engineering background, or was it the other way around? And like I know also like engineering and business also have many different subfields. So like what do you feel like is like the diversity? Was there a really distinct set of strengths or was it like extremely diverse?
Honestly, I think M&TSI was the group of people there, all 75 of us were incredibly diverse. And I was almost surprised at, just for prefacing, There were a lot of international students there, and I was kind of surprised by this. I thought that, like, obviously there would be international students, like, like a few from Canada, a few from China, a few from India, but there were a lot of international students, and I thought it was absolutely amazing to like be able to meet so many people from around the world. But with that said, because there's just like so many diverse perspectives, a lot of people coming from California, a lot of people coming from like the East Coast. I had a friend from Ohio there. And like Canada, there was my roommate was Canadian, and there were a lot of Canadians, other people like that. And because like there were so many people around the world, it really was a diverse set of interests and a diverse set of experiences. I don't think that there was a lot of heavy leaning towards one side. Like it wasn't so much of like, oh yeah, like this group entirely, like we're just good at business and then we are bad at tech, or like the other way around, like we are very tech nerds, but we don't really have anything. On the business side, I think like there was a very good balance of different people in there. And like for me personally, I noticed a lot of my friends, even though like they might have preferred one side to the other, like as a whole, looking at it from a whole class perspective, there was definitely diversity, and like the skills definitely were tipped. When I was talking to some of my friends, some of them would be like, oh, I love like, doing tech things. I like created this whole like Roblox game, like, and like had like millions of plays and things like that. And so I think like it's just very like interesting. And then also like one thing I also wanted to note was that there was just so much like ambition and drive and just accomplishment, I think, in the whole program. Like there wasn't a singular person I talked to where I was like, oh, that's not that impressive. Like every single person there was incredibly impressive with like their resumes or just like simple things that they would say. And I'd be like, whoa, that sounds so interesting. So I think like there was definitely a lot of diversity and just people were very accomplished there.
Yeah, that's definitely really enlightening. That's definitely a good like highlight of like M&TSI. Now moving on to my question, it's like more of like about like the final project. So you mentioned like making like a tech product with the IoT. Just like give us a little bit of like a rundown of like I guess like the rubric, like what were you like supposed to do like tech wise, and like on a business spectrum, what were you supposed to include in like the presentation?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question because the professors and like the whole like team in the program, I think were actually very incredibly flexible with us on what we wanted to do. Just a quick thing, like if you guys ever are curious, like if you three and like for viewers are ever curious about like what the actual projects were, our engineering professor, I'm going on Instagram right now. Our engineering professor actually has an Instagram account, and he was posting about this a while ago. And so if any of you are just curious, if you just search up on Instagram or social media, Sid, like SID underscore pen engineering, like this account, oh, my background's blurred, but if you go to that account, he kind of has like videos of the projects and like our team videos there. So that's very interesting to see. And it was great to see afterwards. But getting to your actual question. So when we first like came to the program, one of the things we had to read was like this little about the projects kind of thing. And essentially the goal was that we were part of this company, and the company was for like high tech, well, not high tech, because like, but it was more for like scalable ventures, things like that, where you would create a product that was designed for like high school and college students. And the point of the product was to connect and create community. And this is like a very broad like topic. Our professors actually encouraged us to like extend this as wide as we wanted to. So there were just definitely a lot of like width and like space to go with for the projects. And that was almost kind of like the starting point. So just to like name a few like different project types, one like for me at least, my project was for like the visually impaired community. And so essentially what we did was that we created a product where you would like text in like in English letters on your phone, on like your computer, and be like, hello, Teens for Business. And then our product, which is like around this big, is supposed to be handheld. And then with Braille dots, it would like print out Braille dots. And then that way the visually impaired could like just run their hands through it, and it would be like easy thing. And it was obviously used for like quicker things. Like it wasn't supposed to be heavy duty, like printing out a whole textbook. It was more so just like quick signs or like things to make the visually impaired community feel more welcomed. So that was ours. And then I know one of my friends, they created a system, or it was more like a machine for like hand washing. So like for restaurants, so like whenever workers or like employees would go in, you know how like there's always the signs like employees must wash their hands. And so like they created this high tech kind of thing where they used AI, and like they could like see like, okay, did you like wash your hands actually for 20 seconds, or did you like just put your hands there, just for fun? And then you can like the employees would have like cards to scan in, and then they would like wash their hands, and that would just keep track of it. But it was very interesting because I watched my friend like download like a bunch of libraries for like tech and like just code all of that in, and it was fascinating. And then another idea, like I think two teams did something similar to this, but it was where it'd be like a cup, and it would basically track like how much you drink, or like how much caffeine you in like your intake was, or like how much water you drank, and like to encourage you to drink more water. So things like that. And then whatever parts we needed, like obviously like no one is going to have like a box like for the scannable one, like no one has a box, like no one has that. So like whatever we needed, Penn ordered it for us. And then we also had like access to like 3D printers, things like that, so we just had to CAD it, and it was all good.
So kind of building on like what Ivan asked about like the people with kind of diverse skill sets in terms of like engineering and business, I guess like, people I guess go into the program like maybe being stronger in a certain aspect. But do you think like by the end of the program and going through these lectures and things like would have made just like you would have grown in both areas, but of course probably maybe more in the area that you were maybe not lacking in, but like a bit worse at in the beginning? I guess during the final project, were people like still focusing on like their strong suit in terms of like where they were at in the beginning, or do you think it was more like by the end, people are good enough at like both the tech aspect and the business aspect to kind of like just work in a group? Or how did you guys kind of work for the final project where you guys like divided up based on what people were good at?
Yeah, so every group had 5 teams, and there were 15 teams. Well, actually, there was one team that only had 4, but like there were 15 teams, and then most teams had 5 people in it. And the way the final project was set up is like the first 2 weeks were actually just like business lectures, or like lectures from Professor Daliwala, or like guest lectures. And so it wasn't really like final project based. It was more so like just introductions, and then like learning about these different fields. And then the last week was kind of where we all like started focusing in on the project. And the thing is that like when like obviously you learned a lot because you had to like go to morning and afternoon lectures, but the thing is like you kind of like start picking up on a lot, because when you're in a team of 5 people and you have a final product, like a literal final product due in like 4 days, like you don't really get to choose a lot of things. Like if you have time, like even if you, let's say if you finish like your part, you still like your team still needed you to do other things as well. Like for me personally, I know I'm a little bit more attuned to the business side, but whenever I finished our financial models, which I did, or like whenever I finished like our like on the last day, I think like the night before, whenever I finished the go to market plan, I was like, it was like 1 a.m. I think, but we were still in the lab. And so like I had 1 hour left until 2 a.m. where I had to go back home or to the dorms. But like that 1 hour, I still had to like help my team like create the final product, because we had like a little glitch in the system. So like even though like that wasn't technically like my thing, like I think a lot of teams, including myself, like we kind of just started helping, and like our tasks started overlapping because there was just so much to do. It wasn't so much of like, yeah, I'm a business person, I'm just gonna stick to business, or like, yeah, I only do tech, I'm not even going to look at the financials. So we kind of all like had to come together because of the time crunch, and also because like it was such a good place of learning, and like the TAs, like they really helped you, and like it was just so fun because they like whenever we worked on it, it was always like a group thing. Like if something was working, like the entire lab, like we'd start like yelling or like screaming about it, and then the entire lab would like almost sarcastically start clapping, but like it was a whole like atmosphere of working together.
Yeah, kind of like moving on from like the final project, I was kind of curious about like your favorite lecture with both the business and engineering sides, and like why those were your favorite lectures.
Ooh, okay, okay. There were a lot of, I think, interesting lectures from both sides. Oh, also another thing, like with the lectures, there was obviously like lectures from the professors themselves, so like Professor Babin and Professor Daliwala, but we also had like guest lectures. And so whether that came from like the deans or like professors of other like subjects, or like we also had guest alumni like talks, and I thought those were fascinating. But just my favorite ones, I think, from Professor Babin, who is the head for like our business classes. One of my favorites was when we came back from New York City, and like that was after like we went to Morgan Stanley and we went through like this entire Google's IPO simulation, because the guy we met with, Michael Grimes, like he was the head of that like IPO. So he kind of like talked us through his experience, like gave us a little simulation run through, things like that. So when we came back, we had like a quick little debrief. It wasn't quick, it was like a whole class. But we had like a debrief about that experience, and I genuinely enjoyed Professor Babin like going through like how an IPO works. Like obviously, I think most students knew like the general process of like an IPO, or like what it is, like how it works, but there were just a lot of like little like tidbits that we didn't know, and like things that you can only really understand through experience, that Michael Grimes like he offhandedly mentioned, and then we would ask Professor Babin to elaborate on that. So like learning like the little neater bits that you can't really just get from like a Wikipedia search on like how does an IPO work, like I thought that was fascinating. And so I really like that one. And then Jonathan Chen, I believe it was. This guy, he was an M&T alum, and he came to talk to us over Zoom, and he's like the head, like he's in Tesla in China, and like he's doing like their battery things, and he like came to talk to us, and it was really interesting because he's kind of not like the typical M&T student. He was a little bit more like artsy, a little bit more like designy kind of thing. So like he talked to us about his experience and was very funny with it. So that was also another one of my favorites. And then on the engineering side, we had one of my favorites was Alarg Chin, and he came to talk to us. And again, he was an M&T alum, but a lot of what he did was like with networks and artificial intelligence. And so he came to talk to us about his experiences. I thought he was absolutely very fun because he had like a little sing along in the middle, because he was like, guys, I went to M&T. I know like how intense things can be sometimes, and so he just like took us for like 2 minutes, and like we just had like a whole sing along. So that was a very, very fun lecture. I think like also, I'm sure everyone that went to M&T would say this, but even though there was like a very like intensive like class like schedule and like assignments we had to do, like I know at least everyone pulled like an all-nighter somewhere in there, but or like went to sleep very late. But like there's also just a lot of fun things in class as well, where like the professors, the guest speakers would just like make sure that we were also having fun in the meantime.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and kind of also like building off of like that, like I guess like a favorite like lecture, like after your engineering lectures, I bet you guys had, I think you discussed this in your intro, but you had like those like hands-on like labs that you could like work with the CAD softwares and stuff. Well, I think what was your favorite like software to like work with, and why?
Ooh, okay. So for our labs, usually what would happen is, well, actually, like the last week, so the third week was a little bit different because that's the week where everyone was like working on their final projects. But for the first 2 weeks, it was week one, we did Arduinos. So like Professor Daliwala would give us like around an hour or like an hour and a half to 2 hour lecture or guest speaker, whatever, until around 4 o'clock. And then 4 to 6, we would go into the labs, and then we would start like actually doing it ourselves. So like we did Arduino, and like we built like little like robots. We also had like the cat spot. And so like that was very cool. And then we also like connected it to Blink, which is like an app on the phone. I think I actually still have my like Blink app here, even though I'm not at the program anymore. But basically, like you just control like the little robot that you built off of your phone. And so that was very interesting. And then for catting, I've like had experience in school with catting, so it wasn't like entirely new to me, but it was very fun because we were able to use like the CADing software, and we were able to like make our little things. And so like we printed out a name tag for ourselves. I actually have mine. It's like not here, but I have it. And like you got to print out like M&TSI, Jackie Wang, or like whatever fun little design you wanted to make. And then we also got to make like whatever design. We got to like one object, I think. I think most people made fidget spinners. I'm not sure why that was a thing, but I think it was because like that was the example in the slides that were presented to us, and we were all like, oh, you know what? Like let's just hop back like 4 years ago. So that was very fun. And then there was a lot of team collaboration, or like just peer collaboration during these labs, because like whenever someone was stuck on something, we had like partners that we could ask, or like TAs that we could ask, or just like anyone in the general lab. You're like, hey, like is anyone else having this issue, or like does anyone know how to like solve this thing? So that was very fun. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if I have like a specific favorite software per se, but those experiences of like in general were great.
Yeah, I guess my next question would be like, I like outside of your final project, did you get to work like lots of other people and I guess like build connections and network with them as well? Like, because I know you had teams of 5, but I'm assuming in the first couple of weeks you also had the chance to kind of like work with other students as well.
Yeah, I think Penn and like the M&TSI program did like a really good job of making sure like we weren't just stuck with 5 people, like 4 other people, I guess. So we actually didn't know the teams until week 2, I want to say, because like that just wasn't the focus in week 1. We had RC groups first of all, like which isn't like an M&TSI specific things. I'm sure like other program kids like they could also tell you about this, but that was kind of where they would group people together and like have RC like meetings. So just like building things, and then we also had like fun bonding activities. So that's where kind of I got to meet people. And our RC like outing or activity, like night 1, like on Sunday night, the first night I got there was actually like where I first met a lot of my friends. So that was interesting. And then we also had there's just like different partners. So like for the labs, we had partners for them. And then those were like kind of randomly selected by the TAs. They would just like put you together, and like, that's kind of where you got to know people. And because you are working on a lab for like 2 hours together, like you're not just gonna sit there and like work on your own thing, or like, right, like you do it together. So that's like you kind of got to know more people. And then another thing is like when you live for 3 weeks with 75 people and you guys are all kind of like going through the same like assignments, the same like courses, you kind of just naturally start bonding with people anyways. And you get to like meet people, like you sit next to them in class, or like you sit next to them in like the engineering lab, things like that. And so you just kind of start meeting people, and you kind of start like, oh, do you guys want to go to dinner together? Or like, oh, let's go grab lunch together at this place. And so you kind of like start forming those connections like as you would in regular school. And then we also had this venture capital negotiation, which is, I think, one of the standout activities at M&TSI, which was where we got to basically take on a venture capital kind of simulation. So they were like 3 groups, like the entrepreneur who like had the venture, obviously, and then 2 different investors, so like the venture capitals. And we obviously learned like a bunch of like business terms, finance things, like how these deals are structured. And then I personally, my team was the role of like the entrepreneurs. Like we were the company that was like getting money and things like that. But basically, like in that, like you were assigned a team, and then you were also assigned 2 other teams who would be investor 1 and investor 2. And that was like a really good way to like meet new people, because you guys had assignments to do. You had to like negotiate with them to like find the best deal. So like obviously you meet, what was it? You meet like 15 other people. So that was very cool. And just another quick thing, I just realized I'm wearing like my pen merch. The bookstore was also like a like destination for us sometimes. Like on the first week we would all just like go at different points, and then quick tip, we like talked to like some of the people at the store, and I think like they restock like every Wednesday, Thursday-ish, so we also kind of figured that out. So this is how I got that. So just fun things.
Yeah, that actually sounds like really fun, but like more about like balancing kind of the workload, because as you said, like at a certain point, most people were like sleeping very late or pulling all-nighters. So how did you kind of balance, work from the program and then like your own time? Like maybe that includes sleeping, but how did you like balance that? And maybe like what is your schedule after school like, especially in the context of like finishing your work for the program?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm sure that's like a very like wondered about question, because another tidbit is that like whenever we were on the elevators, we had like quick conversations with people from other programs, and then I'd be like, oh, like we're from M&TSI, they'd be like, oh, like that's the one with a lot of homework, right? Or like that's the like really no sleep one. And while that kind of is true, it's not like as bad as we sound. So for balancing or just like to walk like through a day, like it really was dependent on which week it was. I know I've said that like a few times, but like week 3 was just wild. But for like weeks 1 and 2, when you're kind of just like starting to settle in, things like that, it was like you'd wake up in the morning. Some people are like early risers. Like my roommate got up super early. But like you got up and like you did things, class started at 10 and then classes ended at 6 around that. So you get like an hour in the middle to like relax. What's interesting is that like I know during regular school and like in real life, lunch can sometimes be a time where like people would try to catch up on work because you get like an hour to do things. But I never really saw anyone at M&TSI trying to do their assignments or trying to do like any catch up things during lunch. So that was interesting. I was like lunch was almost pure like relaxation, hanging out with your friends or like the TAs. And then afterwards, like we have like dinner at 6, and then usually to 7, that was like when we had dinner. And then after that, that was all very much like doing work or like hanging out. And I think like it sounds bad, but the thing is that like a lot of it is that like if you really like locked yourself in a room and you were like, I'm not talking to anyone, I'm not doing anything except working, like I think your sleep schedule would have been fine. You still would have gotten like 8 hours of sleep, but like that's a very difficult thing to do. Like I think like shutting yourself in a room and like be like, I'm not going to talk to anyone, I'm going to be like at peak productivity for 3 weeks, like that's pretty difficult to do. So a lot of what ended up happening was that like we went to the lounges together and we would like work on things together. Like obviously we work on our own things, but like we would just talk. So that wasn't the most time effective thing to do. It was very fun, but like in terms of just productivity, it wasn't the best. But you know, we figured it out, and then um after that we had like some other things, like we went to Huntsman Hall to work on things, and like it was just very fun. But for things like sleeping wise, I know a lot of people like slept later. So like what we would kind of do is like we would hang out at like 8, 9, 10. We would be like working at that time. But then like whenever like we got room checks and like we had to go back to our own rooms at like 12 o'clock. And that's kind of when we started like really, really working, like because we were by ourselves, or like just us and our roommates. So that was like kind of like the more productive times. And then everything before that was really so much more like hangout time, until like the last week, which it was like we were actually in the lab until 2 a.m. working on stuff. It wasn't like social hour. But there was that.
All right, so I know this wasn't the case at LBW, but did you guys have like any like tests or exams that you had to like do on like the mornings before your lectures and in between lectures sometimes?
Okay. That's actually a very interesting question because that just like brought back memories. So the first week we actually had quizzes, and then yeah, it was the first week. So what we did was that we had what are they called? Oh yeah, we had case studies. So we had to like read like around 20 pages of like a case study that was provided to us about like a company and like their decisions. And so we would like read it, understand it, think about it, and then there were like suggested study questions. There were around like five, no, that's a lie. Like around like maybe 8 of them. Like that was an assignment, and so like that the homework for the day basically was to read that case study. And the next day the professor, like he would tell us if we had like a quiz or anything, like Batman would tell us. So if we had a quiz, for example, the one that sticks out most in my head is like the LinkedIn. So we had like a case study on LinkedIn, and then the next morning there would be like a quiz, and it was 15 minutes. And so from the 8 study questions that he gave us, he would choose one, or like he would choose one and like slightly like rephrase it a little bit, take a twist on it. And then he would make you write in 15 minutes like your thoughts on that. So like it was like, should they have done this, or like which one is better, like option 1 or option 2, and then you would choose which one, and then obviously you'd explain your thoughts. And so that was like the only like quiz I can think of. And but it wasn't like so much of a quiz. I think people were stressed about it because there was a 15-minute time crunch, and also the fact that like you don't know which question it would be out of the 8, and he also put like a little twist on it, so you don't really know what it was, so you kind of had to like read your case study and actually like go through all of the details. And it was closed notes, like closed case study obviously, so like you kind of had to like really understand what was happening in that scenario. And I can't remember if it was every day or if it was like every other, no, I think it was every day. So like for example, Tuesday you get one, and then the quiz Monday morning, and then Thursday morning you have another quiz on something else. And I think like one of the reasons why everyone was like woed out a little bit was because we had like a bunch of homework going into the program. So we had homework like even before we technically met the professors, and like they kind of dive right in, and everyone was a little like shook at that. But once we got adjusted to it, I think it was a lot better. And then the quizzes stopped on week 2 where we had like more assignment type things.
Yeah, and then one quick question about like I know you mentioned your trip to New York to Morgan Stanley. Could you go a bit more in depth about kind of like what you guys learned and did there?
Yeah. Okay, so I think like our trip to Newark was one of the most like interesting things. It was like a highlight. Um, honestly, so we left at like 5 a.m. on the bus, and then we came back around like 8 o'clock. Oh, fun fact, we actually had a birthday party whenever we came back from New York. So that was interesting. I like one of my friends had a birthday, and then I went to one of the grocery stores nearby, and like I bought him a cake and then bought him like balloons, and then like my friends and I like we threw him this party. But that was just random. But for the actual New York trip, so we went to Morgan Stanley and then we went to Google in the afternoon. But with Morgan Stanley, we talked, I think I mentioned this, but we talked with Michael Grimes, who is a managing director at Morgan Stanley, but also the head of global technology at Morgan Stanley too. So he kind of did a lot of like the big IPOs, did a lot of like the big deals in the tech industry. So I think he did Google's, he did a lot of other ones. I'm pretty sure he's had like things with Elon Musk as well. So kind of him being there like talking to us throughout the entire morning was really amazing to see. Because like he just had the time to talk to like 75 high schoolers at this one program. Well, his son went to M&TSI and then later on went to M&T as well. So, I guess like some connections there. So maybe that's why he was willing. But it was great to talk to him. And so what we did at Morgan Stanley was we had this Google simulation. So Michael Grimes, he was the one who like did the underwriting and like led the process for Google's IPO. And so what he did was that we had like different IPO styles, or like we had different like IPOs in a simulation, and then every like table, so like we were sat in tables, like we could sit wherever we wanted, but like every table was like a team, and then it represented different parties with like stocks. So for example, like I think I was a hedge fund, and there's like other institutionalized like, groups, and then there was like personal investors, and there was like mutual funds there as well. And so like everyone played their own little role in the IPO, and then it would kind of just simulate how the pricing worked out and how prices would go. So like for example, like obviously it's not like this now because like we have technology and everything, but the way we did it was that like we'd have like the process, like you would try to get shares, and then there's also like you would send someone from your team to go onto like the trading floor, and then you would essentially just like, hey, does anyone want to buy like this many shares for like this price? And it was like kind of what they did years ago on like the actual stock market. So that was very interesting. And then he would tell us like what he like in his own experience, like what he actually did with Google and how that worked out. So that was very interesting. And then Michael Grimes also is like the founder or like the guy who created the MET program at Berkeley. So he kind of really like is into like the whole business and tech intersection. So he was able to give us a lot of tips. And there was like time at the end where we could ask him questions. And so he would talk to us a little bit about internships, things like that, just like career things or like experiences in his like corporate world. So things like that. And then we went to Google, which was totally a different vibe from Morgan Stanley. I think Morgan Stanley is very much like professional, very much like suit and tie, structured. And Google was a lot more like casual, relaxed. And we got like a building tour. We got to like go to like Google's like little like restaurants inside for their employees, get to like talk to Penn alumni at Google. So it was very interesting. I think Newark was great. Yeah, and it was kind of exhausting at the end, but because like we spent so much time there, but because it was like a very big schedule, but it was very fun.
Yeah, that must have been really fun. And I'm a little jealous that we couldn't go to New York for an LPW trip, but so be it. But all right, but going into my last question now, you briefly mentioned that you had some teacher assistants. Did you guys have like TA lunches or any like opportunities to like connect with them, like learn about their experience? Were they like M&T students or M&T alums or yeah.
For the TAs.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. So we had teaching assistants. And so the TAs, I think there were 6 of them. My count might be wrong, but I remember that there were 6. Yeah, like around 6, around that number. And so they were like our main or so like TAs. So like they were the ones in our business lectures, they were the ones in the engineering labs helping us. And so they were all rising sophomore M&T students. So like they kind of know what we're thinking of, like understand like our interests, things like that. And then we also had 2 Penn there were master students who were our engineering TAs, and they were incredibly helpful in our labs. Like I literally cannot emphasize, like whenever someone had a big issue, like their entire just like computer wouldn't work for like their CADing thing, or like whatever product they were building for their final project wasn't working, like they were the ones that we were like, hey, can you please help us? So there were 2 of them. And then we also had Rohan, who was our engineering TA. He was a M&TSI alum, and so he also like came out and helped. But he's like part of the engineering school at Penn. And so they were just like this like kind of support team for us. And they were really, really fun to hang out with. And like we all follow them on Instagram now. So like their socials, things like that. But there was like one night I remember where we were like the 75 students at M&TSI, we just gathered in the Burger Auditorium, which is like where we had our engineering lectures. And the M&T students, like the M&T TAs, like they had a whole presentation about like how we got into M&T. So there, I think there was a lot of like bonding. And then for our projects, like the final projects, we had like TAs, like 2 TAs were assigned to every team. And so they were kind of the ones helping out. And then we had the opportunity to get donuts with them. And so like they would like pay for donuts, whatever. We'd have like this little outing. It was like 15, 20-ish minutes for each team. And it was really fun because that was like kind of where you got to know your TAs. But honestly, I think like most of the bonding happened like when it wasn't so structured, like when you just like talk to them, like when you were getting bubble tea, or like when you talk to them like kind of just randomly and you talk about their life, like their situation at Penn, just general things. I realized like one of the TAs actually, he was from like the West Coast, but like he used to live in the East Coast. He like lived in my neighborhood. So like he knew a bunch of my friends. He knew a bunch of like the things happening in my neighborhood, the schools around me, and obviously my school. So that was very interesting to have that connection to him. But yeah, I thought the TA were like they were absolutely like so amazing. They were really fun to talk to. It wasn't like some big nerd central M&T thing, but they were very fun.
Yeah, and I think for our last question for this episode is for our listeners who might be interested in attending MNTSI in the future, or want to learn more about MNTSI, what tips do you have for them, and what kind of things do you want to like show that MNTSI is great for and you want everybody to know?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I'm sure people are curious about that. I think M&TSI is like a really great place to explore your interests. And this relates to the first question that we answered. It's kind of like a little full circle moment back there. But M&TSI is a place where there's a lot of diverse interests, and there's just so many things that people are interested in. It honestly, like, it kind of blew my mind. Like people were like there are so many things, and everyone was very accomplished in what they wanted to do. And so I think like for M&TSI, you if you're able to like have a passion for something and just pursue it to that end, like you're going to have a lot of fun, and you're going to be able to like get a lot of things done if you're like passionate about it. At M&TSI, I met like a lot of passionate people. Uh, one of my best friends from there, he has like a lot of ideas, and he's very passionate about those like business ideas. We had like when we were coming back from Morgan Stanley and from New York, it was like a 2-3 hour long bus ride. And so he was trying to convince everyone why his new business idea would be a good idea. And whether or not it was a good idea was a little debatable. The professors were like, but he's a very passionate person. And like that was just one quick thing that he thought of. But my point is just like there's a lot of passionate people at M&TSI. So if you're able to like have something you really love and you're able to pursue it, I think like that's amazing. And it's really amazing to see a group of people who are so passionate about what they love to do. And I think like I'm sure people who are watching, like if you're interested in going to M&TSI, you're wondering about like the application for M&TSI. And I think as long as you're able to convey your passion and convey how much you love something. Like one of my friends, her video was like her baking, like obviously talking about her things, but it was like her baking. And then someone else was like a day in their life, but it was like a fun twist on it. So I think if we're able to like present a unique perspective, or present like something that's like just show who you are and like show your interests in business and tech, I think that is kind of what the admissions people are looking at. We met with Gadalon, who is like the obviously like the director of M&T, but he was also very involved in the admissions process for M&TSI. And he actually made a joke one time. He was like, "Yeah, I know who you guys all are. Like, I read all your applications. Like, I know your interests." And there's like he was talking about how there was so many interests and like diverse things with our group. So I think that's like one of the best things and like why the program's so amazing and like so great to interact with people about.